Please have a seat, Attorney General Alberto Gonzales. So I figured the best way to introduce this man is in conversation, but let's get some of the obligatory necessities out of the way first. A man from Humble, Texas, born in 1955 in Humble, Texas.
It's true.
The only person in the history of our republic to serve as White House counsel and Attorney General of the United States. The only person of Hispanic descent in the history of our republic to hold either of those positions. A graduate of Rice University and Harvard Law School, a justice of the Texas Supreme Court. I believe you served about a year and a half or 2 years?
2 years.
Which in Florida time is 1.7 lux. Just an astounding length of time. How did you persevere?
It was very trying. Fortunately, I got a call to go to the White House. I said, okay, let's do that.
And perhaps that's a good place to start the story. I remember being in law school. Thank you.
But this is the Fireside chat.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right. I think we have a fire. Oh, look at that.
Whoa!
Thank you. I bet you they don't do this in Texas.
Oh my gosh, this is very special.
I really wanted to maintain narrative control. But as often happens at conference, that doesn't seem to happen. So why don't you tell us a little bit about George Walker Bush and how you met him?
George Walker Bush, what you see of him publicly is the way he is privately. Very consistent, very average in terms of no pretenses, wonderful as a client, even though in his positions as governor and of course as president, he's much more than a client. He represents the federal government of the United States of America or the state of Texas. And
but he was a client first, right? Just a plain vanilla client?
No.
Never.
In fact, I really didn't know him. I met him a few times. I met him as he campaigned for governor. He asked me to set up a meeting at our law firm, Vincent & Elkins in Houston.
I left that part out. Partner at the venerable global law firm of Vincent & Elkins, just, in his free time.
And so I set up this meeting, and I listened to him for the first time, and I thought, what a great guy. I really liked him. But I said to myself, he has no chance of beating Ad Richards for governor. Very popular incumbent governor. Of course, he won. And about 2 weeks after the election, one of my partners came to me and said, I got this call from George Bush. He wants to know whether or not you'd be interested in being his counsel. And I was very surprised. 2 weeks after that, I went up to Austin to sit down with him for the first time. We talked about what the job entailed, which I loved what I heard from him. And at the end of the conversation, I had to ask him, Governor, there are 65,000 lawyers in Texas. You don't know me, why me? And he told me a story. And back in 1988, when his dad was running for president, I was introduced to some of the people in the campaign, and he wins his election in '88. And they wanted to bring some minorities in the administration. And so they asked me to go to Washington and engage in some interviews. And I was offered a position at Commerce, a position at HUD. But the truth of the matter is, I wanted to stay at my firm because Vincent Elkins had never had a minority partner. And I wanted to make partner. So fast forward to Austin, Bush says, you turned down my old man for a job. And he says, that's how you got on my radar screen. And so I went to work for him 3 years as his counsel, and just a great, great individual. Very solid. Oftentimes,
how did he take bad news?
well, imagine, and I tell my students this at 𝘚𝘶𝘮𝘮, you know, you think you have it rough going home and telling your parents you got a C in a contracts class. Imagine going to the Oval Office and telling the President of the United States, Mr. President, the advice that the lawyers, and it wasn't just me, the lawyers in the administration, including John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, this is during the first term, the advice that we gave you in terms of the scope of your presidential authority in the war on terror, the Supreme Court of the United States just said we were wrong.
Yeah, you know, I've kind of been waiting 20 years for this.
Well, it's not the end of the story. Let me just say,
go on.
what his response was, always, that's what the courts are for. They're there to tell us whether or not we're doing the right thing or not. If they're with us, we continue on. If they rule against us, then we change course. That's the way that he dealt with advice, bad advice, disappointing advice from the courts through the lawyers.
That sounds like a better client than any I had in private practice. Mine usually started screaming in Portuguese. Here's what I was going to apologize for. I was a law clerk, so the Chief Justice and I both clerked at the Federal District Court in D.C., and I clerked for John Bates. And in the early days of the War on Terror, there were a few of those Guantanamo cases working their way through the district court. And I remember he and I had a conversation once. I think I could probably talk about this now, right? Where he was like, you know, I don't think the White House that appointed me is going to be terribly happy with my ruling in this case. And I kind of shook my head, and yeah, now I get to apologize. So I'm very sorry for upsetting 20 years ago. I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about having historically, you're the only person who has been both White House counsel and Attorney General of the United States. Obviously, we can sketch the differences between the two jobs.
Big differences.
Huge differences. Can you tell us a little bit about how you would do those two jobs today?
That's an easy question to answer if I can assume President Bush is president.
Well, folks, it's been fun.
It makes a huge difference. It really does. I can't imagine being the counsel or even the Attorney General for some recent presidents. I'll just say it that way. It really makes a big difference. The experience, I'm often asked, the things you've done, which job was the most fun, the most fulfilling? Being a cabinet secretary, being the Attorney General is an incredible privilege if you're a lawyer. Particularly, there are cool things that come with it, like being driven around in two black FBI Suburbans with agents carrying machine guns wherever you go, flying around the country, around the world in a Learjet, a FBI Learjet. So just incredible things to be able to do. But the job is incredibly hard. Every decision you make as Attorney General, you're going to be criticized whether you're right or wrong, because there are always losers, quite frankly, in the decisions made at the Department of Justice. You have to you're reporting to the press all the time. You're hauled up to the Hill all the time, oversight hearings. So it's an extremely demanding job. The best job, I think, I ever had as a lawyer was being White House counsel. If you're an American citizen and you get to go to work every day in the White House, it is incredibly cool. You have citizens who come to those black iron rod gates, peering through those gates, just trying to get a glimpse of the president or a cabinet secretary. But to be able to go there every day and advise the most powerful person in the world, someone that I knew from our days in Texas, and someone that I respected and I considered as a friend, it just doesn't get any better than that. And particularly then you add on top of that the consequential decisions that had to be made. And watching Bush as a decision maker, making very tough decisions, even with incomplete information, and oftentimes without much time to make those decisions, and us trying to support him. And one of the things I always admired about Bush was he is a decision maker. You give him the information that that you can. He makes a decision and then he moves on. Why? Because there's no second guessing, no hand wringing, because the next big decision is waiting right outside the Oval Office door. It's just decision after decision that has to be made as President of the United States. And it is the reason why you look at the way a incoming president looks at the beginning of a term and what they look like after 4 years, after 8 years. It's because the President of the United States is running a marathon. Those of us who worked for him, and typically younger, much younger, at a much younger age, we're running at a sprint as fast as we can. And after about 3 years, you fall over and you die and you're replaced by someone else. But the president is there, and he is working hard all the time. It's an incredibly hard job. Can't imagine how difficult the decisions are. We think as lawyers that we have to make some pretty tough decisions from time to time. It's that way every day at the White House.
I have often thought that it is providential that at that critical moment in American history, we had, as a president, someone who had as his literal father the perfect model for the job. What can you tell us about the President, George W. Bush's the degree to which he relied on his father as a model for decision-making in the way you've described?
I think, occasionally I'd go down to the Oval Office and his father would be there. He was a constant figure, but I think from what I observed, he wasn't there to really give advice to his son. He was there to support his son in the decision that the son was going to make. And he was like a normal father. I remember the day of the election for the second term. He was in a close contest with John Kerry. And I was in my office on the council's office is on the second floor of the West Wing. And I'm sitting at my desk, and President George H.W. Bush walks in, sits down on my couch, and of course, I sit at attention immediately. And I said, "How are you doing, Mr. President?" And he said, "I'm worried." He was worried that his son was going to lose the re-election. At that moment, he wasn't a former president. He was just a dad. The entire family, the interaction that we saw, I'm here with my wife, Becky. I think there are very few, we call them Bushies, people that worked for the Bushes. I think there are very few Bushies who didn't come away from that relationship, that experience, with a great deal of admiration and respect for their efforts. Were they perfect? No. Did we make mistakes? Oh Lord, did we make some mistakes? But we did our best. And I never had any question whatsoever. The decisions made by President Bush were based upon his best judgment. This is what's best for the country. It may be controversial. I may get criticized for it, but this is what I believe is right for the nation. And really set a great example for all of us.
And I'm sure that example...
I'm biased, no question about it.
You're a White House counsel, you're your client, it's not biased, but it is interesting though how you went from being an unbiased actor, being a state Supreme Court justice, to again having clients, a thought that literally terrifies me. I'm looking at you, Ricky Polston, and Alan Lawson. What was that transition like? What was the transition like from taking off the robe and having not just clients again, but in many respects the fate of the Republic and the free world riding on the advice that you were giving your clients?
For me, maybe the judges aren't going to really appreciate this answer. It was freeing. I went on the court. I had questions about going on the court. I was Secretary of State. Raul Gonzales was on the Texas Supreme Court, the only Hispanic on the court. Gonzales announced he's stepping down. I knew immediately, because of my relationship with Governor Bush, that he probably was going to look hard at maybe asking me to go on the court. But I had not litigated cases. I was a deals lawyer at Vinson Elkins. Sure enough, the next day after the announcement, Bush is entertaining the energy minister from Mexico for breakfast at the governor's mansion. I'm there as Secretary of State because in my portfolio was border issues. After the breakfast, the governor asked me to come upstairs to the bedroom, and we sit down, and he says, "Do you want to go in the Supreme Court?" And anticipating the question, I gave the dumbest answer. I said, "Do you want me to go on the Supreme Court?" And he laughed and he said, "It's not what I want. Do you want to go on the court?" And I was very candid with him. I said, I don't know. I worried that I would not do a good job, not having been a litigator. I didn't want to embarrass him. I certainly didn't want to embarrass me and my family. And so we agreed that I would think about it. I talked to my friends and supporters around the state and finally decided this was the best thing for me. And fortunately, I went on a court that had 8 Republicans. I was a Republican. It was a very friendly, collegial court. And they kind of took me under their wings and helped me do the job. After about a year and a half, Clay Johnson, Bush's roommate in college, came to me and he said, Bush is running for president, and he says, "I've been tasked to put together the team when Bush wins the White House. We're looking for a White House counsel. He has confidence in you. Will you do this?" And I gave him the diplomatic answer. Well, I need to go home and talk to my wife first. But
I have a wife, Becky, too, so I would give exactly the same answer.
But I knew immediately, my goodness, as a lawyer, to be able to go to Washington to be White House counsel to the President of the United States for someone that you knew what kind of person, how they make decisions and receive bad news. And so we watched the Florida recount with a great deal of interest because we had so much at stake. The outcome of that recount would fundamentally change the trajectory of my life. And so, of course, the recount is over, and the day after Christmas, get on a plane with other Bushies, and we start our next adventure. It was really quite something. And maybe and I mentioned this on the phone, maybe I was too young at the time to go on the court. And maybe I just feel more comfortable. I like the hand-to-hand combat of working on major significant problems. And so very, very happy as White House counsel.
I'm actually, given the history of the Florida Supreme Court, I'm very surprised at how little hand-to-hand combat we have.
Oh, really?
I wonder if we can talk a bit about the role you played, probably as White House counsel, but maybe also in the Attorney General's office, in selecting justices of the United States Supreme Court.
During the transition, President Bush came to me and said that this was going to be important. An important part of the job was to help him in selecting people to go on the Supreme Court. He did express some disappointment in some of his dad's appointment of one particular justice in particular, and he said, "I don't want to make a mistake. So your job is to work with John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, and make sure that we put the right people on the court." And so immediately we began interviewing people as quietly as we could. I went out to Mike Ludig's house, for example, in Northern Virginia, and spent an afternoon with him. We brought in Sam Alito quietly. We brought in Judge 𝘚𝘶𝘗𝘳 as well. So we looked at various people. And the reason we did that, the face-to-face, is because Bush is very much a people person. He depended on us to make sure they were qualified, but he also wanted a sense of what kind of person is this man or this woman.
What are the characteristics that mattered to him?
Consistency, very, very conservative in his thinking about the role of a judge, and that was the other thing that I think made my job perhaps more important to him, was the fact that he wasn't a lawyer. If I had worked for President Obama, I think as a lawyer he would have probably a better sense of the role of the court and the role of justices.
Maybe not a better sense.
Well, a different sense.
Yes.
A different sense. But Bush was not a lawyer, and so I think he really relied upon the lawyers in the White House counsel's office and at Justice in terms of making a decision on the court.
How much of the process for you was assessment of, you said consistency, was it seen by you, or is it seen by you now as a virtue, to be ideologically consistent over the course of a long career? Is that more important in how you assess people, or was persuadability part of the analysis?
I think both were important. Yeah, I think both were important.
So I was finishing my clerkship when the Roberts nomination to the DC circuit was rumbling along, and Judge Bates came to me and said, you know, I have a friend who's interviewing with the White House. They may put him on the DC circuit. I'd like you to meet him because, you know, maybe you're here, maybe you should do a DC circuit clerkship. And I said, I gotta go make money, I'm not interested. And of course it turns out to be John Roberts, who then immediately gets nominated to the US Supreme Court, and then Rehnquist dies, and he gets nominated to be Chief Justice of the United States, and I'm sitting in a warehouse, like circling all the numbers in a prospectus so the accountants will give us comfort on it, shaking my fist at the White House. So sorry about that. I didn't mean you personally, but our lives, this is a big deal for me. Tonight's a big deal for me because you've been
It's a big deal for me.
You have been an inspiration, and you still are.
Not to all.
So we could talk a little. Like I think part of what makes you an inspiration and a significant figure in American history is the fact that you were piloting the Justice Department through perhaps the most perilous time in my life, the years after 9/11. And
I think, if I could interrupt you just a second, I think John Ashcroft carried a much heavier load, quite frankly.
It's gracious of you to say. It's gracious of you to say.
And it wasn't just John. It was, I would host meetings in my office in the White House after 9/11 with lawyers from Justice, with lawyers from the CIA, lawyers from NSA, lawyers from Defense, lawyers from Treasury, lawyers from State. We would get there, we would get together, we would analyze the problem and try to reach consensus on what is the right legal answer. But at the end of those meetings, I would turn to the Attorney General or the representative from Justice and say, okay, you just heard this discussion. The Department of Justice is charged by statute to advise the executive branch. So John Ashcroft will have the final word. And that's the way we operated. And as you can imagine, these were controversial issues: interrogation, Guantanamo, surveillance. So we had some very difficult discussions as lawyers. And when I would inform the president about the decision, the recommendation from the lawyers, I would let him know whether or not there was whether there was dissent or not, and how serious was the dissent. But he always understood that the role of the Department of Justice is to advise the president, and he would always follow that advice.
Has he ever painted your portrait? I know he
hasn't. It was one of the great disappointments in my life, folks. That's no, of course, I'm just kidding. But no, he hasn't. But that would be cool.
Would you like us to work on that for you?
No, just leave him alone.
Davy Crockett somewhat famously said upon losing his fourth election for Congress in Tennessee that the voters of Tennessee could go to hell and he was going to Texas. And of course he went and died at the Alamo.
There is a story, let me tell you this story. When I first got to Tennessee, I'd be asked to come speak, and I would always brag about being a Texan. Proud to be a Texan. And just would pontificate about being a Texan, and invariably someone would come up to me afterwards and say, there wouldn't be a Texas but for Tennesseans who died at the Alamo.
Well, you went the other way. I like to think you recolonized.
Okay.
I like to think you invaded.
I planted the flag. All right.
I wonder if maybe this is sensitive. This might be too classified. I was hopeful that I wouldn't get into any classified stuff. And I think now the closest I'm going to come is talking about baseball. I have read that you are the chair of a group in Nashville that is working to bring a Major League Baseball team to Nashville. Can you confirm or deny that?
I can confirm that.
Okay. Second question. If there is such a team, what would you call it?
Well, the name that we've settled on, and of course, the owner of the franchise, the person who's going to lay down over $2 billion to own a franchise, is going to have the final say, of course, in terms of the name. The name that we we are presently using in our advertisements and communications is the Nashville Stars. And the reason is because it's named after a Negro Leagues baseball team that once played in Nashville in the 1930s and 40s. In the history of baseball, there's never been a baseball team named after a Negro Leagues team. And so we thought it'd be a nice legacy, quite frankly, and hopefully helpful in getting a franchise, and I think would be attractive to Major League Baseball, who is looking at ways to try to attract greater minority interest in the game of baseball. So, it would, if we get our way, it would be the Nashville Stars, but who knows what's going to happen.
Asking on behalf of the Marlins, is this an American League team or National League team?
That it'll depend on what the commissioner's office wants to do and the owners.
I feel like the Marlins could really use an expansion team in their bracket. Just something to help us out.
I'll tell you, we'll work on that, okay?
Please, I have had so much fun preparing for this conversation, so much fun having this conversation. You really are, in the grace and resolve you have shown in your long legal career, been a mentor to so many of us who from afar know what it is to grow up with parents who spoke English as a second language, who came to this country with a great sense of hope and idealism and gratitude for this country. And I knew as a young person studying your life that your life was significant because of what it said about America. I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on what your grandparents would say if they were sitting with us here tonight about the journey you've had.
I think, I guess I don't try to think about it in terms of having done great things. It's like my mom, she was interviewed once by a reporter, and the reporter asked, "Aren't you proud of your son, Albert?" That's what they called me in high school, Albert. And she said, "I'm proud of all my children." And what I got from my parents, from my mom, she has incredibly strong faith, belief in God. And by the way, I'm not sure it's appropriate to say that in this crowd, I do not believe you can be President of the United States and carry out those responsibilities if you don't believe in God and if you don't believe in the power of prayer. As simple as that. I mean, the job, it's just too hard. It's just too hard for any one person to have to shoulder alone. So the faith is important to me, and I think that I received that from my mom, who made sure that we went to church every Sunday, a good Catholic woman. My dad was an alcoholic, and we had some tough weekends, but no matter how difficult those weekends were, every Monday morning he got up and went to work. Why? Because he had children and a family to provide for. And what I learned from him was the importance of showing up, being responsible, just doing your job. And I know sometimes we'd ask President Bush during difficult moments, what can we do to help you? And that would be his response. Particularly on 9/11, the day of 9/11, when he got off that helicopter and came toward us, I was standing at the Oval Office porch with Karen Hughes, communications director, and we greeted him, and he just nodded his head and walked right by us and into the Oval Office. And behind the Oval Office is a small study and a small dining room, for those of you who haven't been in there. And we followed him into the study, and he, all of us, we were met by Connie Rice, National Security Advisor, Andy Carter, the Chief of Staff, and Ari Fleischer, the Press Secretary, and we began talking about what each of us had experienced that day, and we began working on what the President was going to say to the nation that night. And I remember asking him, what can we do to help you? And he just said simply, just do your job. Just do your job. If you do your job, I do my job, we'll be as good as we can be. So that was an important lesson. But from my parents, I think to sum it all up, just do your job.
Well, I will endeavor to do mine. I hope I've done a decent job of having this conversation be an introduction.
I spent the morning speaking to a group of individuals in the media in New Orleans, so this has been a much more pleasant. a much more pleasant experience.
It was, is there some question I haven't asked, some hard question I've left on the table? Because I feel like...
No, you've done a great job.
All right, good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Alberto Gonzales.
Thank you.